Hello, BookTube, it's Amy, and I'm back with another segment of my 2024 bookshelf tour. The other day we did the top two layers of that shelf on the right there, and today we're going to start here. Now you'll see I have 3 random books thrown on top here, and that's because I'm at capacity. And these are ones I haven't read yet, or at least I haven't read these copies yet. And oh, that was a mistake. I've crushed the top of Dumas and I've crushed the top of Umberto Eco. I should not be storing those there. I need to find somewhere else to put those. But this one strangely arrived in the mail for me, and I realized I must have pre-ordered it months ago on Amazon and forgot all about it. It's something called How to Be a Renaissance Woman, The Untold History of Beauty and Female Creativity by Jill Burke. And I'm sure I must have, on some evening, some lonely evening while I'm scrolling Amazon, I'm sure I must have ordered this one because it is in my order history. But I completely forgot about it until it showed up. And it is a new release in 2024. Here, let's put it down on the floor here to get a better look. But let's skip all that because this is a bookshelf tour and I don't want to get too wrapped up in one book, but we'll take a look at the table of contents. Part 1, Beauty Ideals. Part 2, Judgment. Part 3, Renaissance Bodywork. Witch hunts and body hair. Breast bags, nose jobs, and labiaplasty. Getting in shape. So it could be interesting. It could be utter garbage, but we'll see. There's some nice art in here, I guess. So that is just sitting on top. And then copy of Machiavelli's The Prince, which I read as a teenager, and picked up another copy from a little free library recently. I thought, oh, that one's in nice condition. I could do with a copy of that on my shelves. And then we have sitting here a collection of letters between Simone de Beauvoir and Elizabeth Lecoyne and Maurice Merleau-Ponty from 1920 to 1959. These are completely in French, so that's one of my 2024 challenges, to be able to read my way through some of these letters. As far as I know, they've not been translated into English. So that's what was sitting on top. Maybe I've just got to shove these on a bottom shelf, double shelved. But moving on the end here, I've got a copy of Wordsworth's major works, including the Prelude in an Oxford World Classics edition. The summer of 2020, I spent a lot of time reading Wordsworth and Coleridge, and greatly enjoyed Wordsworth's poetry especially. I had, of course, read him in undergrad when I was doing my English degree, but not to the extent in which I read him in 2020 and a little bit in the summer of 2021 as well. But for me, the spring and summer of 2020, that first spring and summer of the pandemic, when everything was quiet and the parks and walking paths were kind of deserted, that is my summer of Wordsworth and Coleridge, and of course Taylor Swift's album Folklore. So then we have a copy of Jack Kerouac's The Dharma Bums. I'm not a huge Jack Kerouac fan, but I do have that particular book on my shelf. I don't have a copy of The Road anymore, although I have read that at least once, maybe twice. I have a couple of Alberto Moravia's here. I used to have a whole collection of paperbacks of Alberto Moravia's novels and some of his stories, but I had read him mainly in my early 20s when I was in undergrad. I had just gone into the library where I went to university and pulled a few of his books off the shelves. And in one of my many, many purges in my book collection last year, I pretty much purged everything except, I would say, my two favorite and my two most interesting novels from him. So there is Two, which is the first translation of this novel from Italian. And I think it's got, well, I know it has a different title in the more recent English translation, which I'm not remembering right now. But this is the earliest English translation of that novel from the Italian. And then here's his novel, The Empty Canvas, which this dust jacket is in great condition considering the age. Let me just open up to the publication date here. It's not, an especially old book, but for 1961, that dust jacket is in pretty nice condition. And this one is about an artist who decides that perhaps he doesn't want to be an artist anymore. And for some reason it felt fitting to shelve the Moravia next to William Gaddis. The recognitions, I read my way through this, and I think it was maybe 2021 or 2022. It's been at least a year or two. I'm just seeing here, yes, it was 2021. I think I read the first bulk of it in March and in April, set it aside and returned to it in June of 2021 because it's quite a hefty volume, and it's the kind of book that does take care and time. It's the kind of book where I was sort of underlining and making notes just because it was so interesting and unique in its writing style. It doesn't have a traditional narrative structure. We're sort of bouncing all over the place with different characters. It's as though we're, a fly on the wall popping into these different social scenes and getting the story that way. And it's sort of a look at the literary and artistic scene of the era. And I believe that one was published in the 1950s, if I'm remembering correctly. But I could be a little off base about that, and I just pushed it back in, so I'm not going to pull it back out and look at the publication date. Then we have some of my Everyman library editions. We have The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, and when I repurchased this book a couple of years ago, I did dip back into just the beginning of it, but I haven't read it in its entirety since I was 14 years old. There was one very, very memorable summer after I finished my grade 9 year of high school, where it was the last day of school for the summer, and I did as all book-obsessed, introverted teenage girls do. And after I walked out of school, I went immediately to the local public library and I put together a stack of classics because I decided that was the summer I was going to read the classics. And I started out with Villette by Charlotte Bronte, and I read that one in about a day and a half. I moved on to, I think, The Three Musketeers was next, and this took me maybe 2 or 3 days to read. And I moved on to The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sherlock Holmes. I had Great Expectations by Charles Dickens in there, and Jane Eyre, also by Charlotte Bronte. And I think I may have read a Jane Austen in there as well. But all that summer and all that following year, I absolutely immersed myself in literary classics. I won't say for the first time, but for the first time intentionally. There were many that I had read in abridged versions or, full versions as a child, but it wasn't until I was about 14 that I really dug in intentionally. So then we have a collection of works by Raymond Chandler. This one has The Big Sleep, which of course was made into an excellent film in the 30s with Humphrey Bogart, Farewell, My Lovely, and The High Window. once again, I haven't really touched this volume in several years. I read it at some point in my undergrad. I bought The Chandler and the Dashiell Hammett, I think at the same time, because The Maltese Falcon, a story by Dashiell Hammett, was once again made into a delightful film in the 1940s starring Humphrey Bogart. And I was a huge fan of Humphrey Bogart in my teenage years and into my early 20s. I'm still a fan of Humphrey Bogart, although I think it's been several years since I've really watched anything with him in it. This one also has The Thin Man and Red Harvest. And then we have Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, which I have unfortunately torn and crushed a little bit of the dust jacket through my carelessness. But this is a great novel by Umberto Eco. It's about a murder, or a series of murders and suspicious deaths at a monastery. And it just so happens to be a monastery with the most extraordinary library you could imagine. And so it's a great novel for book lovers. And next to the Everyman Library, there are some NYRB editions. The Recognitions by Gaddis is an NYRB edition. And these are the NYRB editions I've chosen to keep. I've bought probably 2 to 3 times as many NYRB editions as you see on the shelf here, but not all of them have made it at this point to my shelves. Although I have kind of a large collection of books, I would say 3 to 4 times the amount of books that I have here have cycled through my collection at one point or another, certainly in the last 15 years. The books of my childhood I cannot account for, but I will just say the books of my childhood were in the hundreds, if not the thousands as well. Because my family were avid thrift shoppers when I was a child. We got everything secondhand, be it clothes, be it housewares, that kind of thing. And of course, well, I'm shopping for, clothing for school or whatnot, I would wander my way to the book section and spend all my meager allowance on books, and the books were cheap. This was, the late 90s, early 2000s, when books could still be had for, a quarter, 50 cents, $1 secondhand. So I had so many books growing up. That was the one thing that was easy to afford and I had easy access to. So here we have a novel by Patrick Modiano, translated by Chris Clark. And I think I've read this one 3 times now, In the Cafe of Lost Youth. It's this great little slim volume about memories of youth, memories of a woman that our narrator used to know in a cafe. And it's nothing extraordinary, but it is a nice little story. And so I return to it now and then. Next to it, we have another novel by Patrick Modiano titled Young Once. Also, a nice little story reminiscing on the past, on youth. And I believe both of these are set in... No, this one is set in the French countryside. The Cafe of Lost Youth is set in Paris. But both these novels are translated from the French. And I believe Patrick Modiano has written a large number of books, and I think I've read maybe one other from him, but these are the 2 that are on my shelf. Then we have Jean-Paul Kleber's Paris Vagabond, and this one has just sort of wonderful images and photos of people and places in Paris, and it really is just kind of a snapshot of the city of Paris in a moment in time. And then we have Curzio Malapart's Diary of a Foreigner in Paris, with an introduction by Edmund White. And I recall enjoying this one, but also kind of hesitating as to whether to keep it. But then I thought, well, it fits in nicely with the rest of the books translated from the French, and so I ended up leaving it here. Next to it is one of my absolute favorite NYRB editions I've ever read. I did a video on this book when I first read it. This is Memoirs from Beyond the Grave, 1768 to 1800 by François-René de Chateaubriand, with an introduction by Anke Molstein. And this is, as it says, a memoir, but it is a soaring and vast, adventurous memoir with just a touch of philosophy and a touch of self-grandeur. I did try to look into Chateaubriand's other works, and I came across one that I would not recommend. I'm forgetting the title of it just now, but I would say stick with his memoir. Don't try to dig into his nonfiction works, because you're likely to find things that are very much of their time and not palatable to our modern sensibilities. And so let's slide that nicely back in there. And next to it, I have The Invention of Morel by Adolfo Bioy Césaires. It has a prologue by Jorge Luis Borges. And this is one that I've read 2 or 3 times as well. It's this creepy little novella about this mysterious island where our main character gets drawn into this kind of toxic, well, I won't spoil it, but it's absolutely wonderful. And next to it is John Gioni's The Open Road. One of my favorites of last year. I believe I read it last year. I hope it wasn't 2022. To be honest, 2022 and 2023 kind of run together in my mind. But this is kind of a great on-the-road story, a story of, 2 men who are literally walking somewhere, form this uncertain friendship, have a few adventures, and although I thought the ending was a little off, overall I enjoyed it, and I think I actually would recommend this one if you're looking for a work in translation that sort of has that, adventure, on the road, walking places feel to it. So we'll slide that one in. And now we're on to Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, and you might be like, why are these ones next to the NYRB classics? Well, the story is that once upon a time, when these shelves were in a different order, these ones ended up being grouped next to the works of Simone de Beauvoir. Now everything is topsy-turvy and the shelves have moved, and the Sartre has ended up disconnected from de Beauvoir, and it's just where they ended up fitting. And I thought, well, it does kind of work, because a lot of the NYRB classics are French works in translation, and Sartre is, of course, a French author. And so we have his War Diaries from 1939 to 1940, the so-called phony war, where he was more or less sitting around, not doing much. His job in the military was basically to report and check on the weather. And so he had a lot of time to write, not a whole lot of danger in his early days in the war. Then we have The Wall, and of course, Nausea. Next to that, the little volume titled Existentialism is a Humanism, which contains a lecture that he gave in written format. We have The Age of Reason, which is the first novel in his trilogy of books, the next ones being The Reprieve and Iron in the Soul. To be honest, Age of Reason, Yes, worth reading if you're interested in discovering his literary style and interested in the themes that show up in his writing. The Reprieve and Iron in the Soul, maybe not so much. Not something that I'm planning to reread anytime soon, but they are, on my shelf because I thought, well, I'll keep the set. And they do have my notes in them. I did actually used to have The Age of Reason in a second copy to match these vintage earlier penguins, but I did get rid of that one because my notes were in it, and I thought, well, I have this newer penguin with my notes, and I don't love that novel enough to keep 2 copies of it. But I'm seeing we're at 20 minutes again already, and I only made it through 1 shelf. So we're going to call it. And next time I will come down to the Orwell and the Wolf and the New Canadian Library and the Hemingway and some of the assorted volumes on that bottom shelf. Hopefully, I should be able to go a little bit faster, but I had so much to say about these books here. So let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them.